Welcome to the SSI Orbit podcast, a forum where we explore the ever-growing ecosystems of self-sovereign identity. And I'm your host, Mathieu Glaude. In this episode of SSI Orbit, I sit down with Riley Hughes. Riley is a leader in the self-sovereign identity community. As the second employee hired at the Sovereign Foundation, Riley established and contributed towards several teams, such as the Sovereign Governance Working Group, and helped set up the Sovereign Steward Program. Riley then started Trinsic to make implementing decentralized identity easy for developers and is now working with many organizations around the world to bring SSI-based solutions to market. Now, during this conversation, we discuss how he got into SSI through Sovereign and how he continued his journey by founding Trinsic. We talk about Trinsic's new focus on making ecosystem development easy for developers. We discuss if self-sovereign identity has an identity problem. We discuss how to sell the value of SSI to enterprises and ecosystem solution providers. And finally, we touch upon the two ways to overcome the chicken and egg problem that exists when starting a verifiable credential market. Here's my conversation with Riley Hughes. Enjoy. I wanted to start with a quote, Riley, from the movie Inception, from Leonardo DiCaprio's character Cobb. And I've seen this quote in an article that you've written before, and the quote goes like this: "What is the most resilient parasite? Is it bacteria, a virus, an intestinal worm? An idea. Resilient, highly contagious. Once an idea has taken hold of the brain, it's almost impossible to eradicate." So you had used this quote to kind of refer to self-sovereign identity, or just when you started thinking about digital trust for the first time some years ago. Do you mind kind of giving a background of how this kind of has taken over your brain and your life, and really the mission behind Trinsic today?
Yeah, that's an awesome quote. I'm glad that you brought that back up. I think the first time I was exposed to self-sovereign identity and this kind of concept of decentralized identity was when I interviewed for a job at the Sovereign Foundation, when it was looking to hire its first employee. And my interview was with somebody named Steve Fulling, as well as Phil Windley. And Phil Windley is the founder of the Internet Identity Workshop. He was the chair of the board of Sovereign. He's kind of a guru, and he really was good at conveying the vision and what we were trying to accomplish. And so, I went in for a regular job interview, and it went well, but after I left the interview, so I looked everywhere around me, and all I could see were digital credentials or the lack thereof, right? It was like, once I saw the way the world could operate, I've never been able to go about life normally again. And even just like the daily things about one time UPS was shipping me a package, and I wanted to pick it up at the distribution center, but I couldn't prove that it was actually me who bought the package, right? I don't know. Just I used to work in the solar industry and getting people's electricity data so that we could build them a solar panel estimate, things like that, right? Everyday activities that you don't normally hear about as like the prime KYC or health credentials, or the prime SSI use cases. But once the reason I love that quote is because digital credentials and verifiable data can not only impact kind of the use cases that everybody tends to think about when they think about SSI, but they could really permeate our whole lives and streamline everything we do. And so and I think that was evidenced throughout my time in this space. Is it seems like people who get into self-sovereign identity can't get out. It's like even people that I worked with at the Sovereign Foundation, I think while we were there, we never ever had any attrition of employees, even though the Sovereign Foundation was a hard place to be because of funding challenges. And of course, ultimately, those funding challenges were, resulted in people losing their jobs at one point. But even throughout all that, nobody ever left. And we've seen the same thing at Trinsic. Nobody's ever left. unless they're, an intern or something going to their next thing. But and I don't know, Matthew, maybe you could speak to this, but I remember when Northern Block came into this space, and you weren't just only focused on self-sovereign identity, but it seems like you've really leaned into this. And I think that's characteristic of what I've seen over and over and over is once this concept infects your brain, you really can't help but go all in. And I've seen that over and over. And I think that's testament to, that's a characteristic of really promising movements, is that once you see it, you can't unsee it. And I think it's really inevitable that the world is going to go this direction.
Yeah, obviously, it's a similar mindset and feelings that you had towards SSI or digital trust or trust over IP, however we call it. It was a similar feeling I had some years before when I got into crypto and blockchain and just decentralized technology as a whole. And I think having worked on just many software projects that utilize some decentralized or distributed computing technology, one or another, it's just that property of verifiability that comes with these verifiable credentials is something that, for me at least, it was missing in the decentralized stack that we were playing in. Like it was cool that we were building distributed or decentralized protocols for, you name the use case, we kind of touched it all, but it was really missing that core, like I guess the core property of verifiability, where a lot of people were trying to use technologies like distributed ledgers or blockchains to solve every problem in the world. But when it came to really lack of trust in transactions that were due to verifiability of data, that was kind of like a light went off there. So I guess as you started working at the Sovereign Foundation, I'm assuming you got more and more excited about that. What are the types of things that you did at the Sovereign Foundation in the early days?
Yeah, definitely. Sovereign was a very cool place to be because, first of all, from like a personal development standpoint, as the first employee there, there was a lot to do, and I wore a lot of hats. So I did a lot, when I first joined. I think the other cool thing about it was that at the time, Sovereign was really, I don't even remember. I'm trying to remember the timing here. I don't even remember if the Decentralized Identity Foundation was established yet. It may have been, but at any rate, it was early. And the Trust over IP Foundation was definitely not established. And so really, Sovereign was kind of the most established place to go if you were interested in this space. It was kind of the destination, right? So my first major undertaking at the Sovereign Foundation was to establish the Sovereign Steward Program, which is the program that the Sovereign Foundation runs to get nodes operating, organizations to operate nodes on the Sovereign network. And part of the governance of Sovereign is that the nodes are permissioned, but the read and write access was thought to be, ideally, eventually totally public. So although the consensus protocol on the blockchain was done in a permissioned fashion, that the everything else would be public. Part of establishing the governance over the permissioning of the nodes that operated consensus on the network was essentially establishing a standardized process through open governance to get, allow new stewards to join the network and add a node and participate in consensus. And that whole initial process was kind of my first major project. And the first step in that process is usually to have a call with somebody who works at the Sovereign Foundation or somebody on the committee called the Steward Qualification Committee. And so originally all of that was done by me, and eventually it became much more decentralized with different volunteers from around the world who were operating on and doing that, and it's still being done today. But initially it was all me. And so in line with what I was just saying around Sovereign being the first kind of destination for organizations who wanted to get involved with decentralized identity, I had so many calls. I'd have my whole day would be filled with conversations with people who were interested in applying this new technology to some business problem that they had. So I got to hear from the very beginning about all sorts of business problems and all sorts of industries that people were trying to apply self-sovereign identity and essentially just absorb all those learnings, in a way that was really, I think, unique. And I don't know if I would have been able to have that opportunity anywhere else in the world at that time.
There's something not funny, but you see this happening over and over again, where you see areas like Silicon Valley that just foster technology startups, and it's just they kind of all leverage each other, right? You get in these really condensed environments with people working in the same direction, and you seem to see an ecosystem form where different companies or different people being able to leverage each other's skill sets for something specific. And when I look at just Utah in general, where Trinsic is based, although I know, I guess you could go into this a little more. Just a lot of our companies today have more a global footprint, and we're able to work with people throughout the world. But it's quite crazy to look at Utah and just look at, the Sovereign coming out of there, all the SSI companies coming out of there, all the fintech companies coming out of there. It's absolutely crazy. It feels like there's entrepreneurship kind of in the mountain water that everyone's drinking down there.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I think, part of that is that, like I mentioned, once people, see it, they can't unsee it. And people stay in the self-sovereign identity space, even if they leave it, right? So if you look at all the people who were laid off from the Sovereign Foundation, almost all of them, I'm trying to think like on the spot here, if any, did something like left the space entirely. Nathan George, went to Kiva. Ken Ebert and others here based in Utah started Indicio Tech, along with Heather Dahl, who's based out of DC. But, of course, Evernym has a presence here in Utah, and people who've left Evernym have gone on to start things or integrate SSI into their own applications. Mike Lauder has now started a company called TrustFrame that's based here in Utah. Of course, I came from that ecosystem and started Trinsic. And so I'm telling you, people can't leave once they see this. And it's such an opportunity. It's such an open ocean, I guess, that, it makes sense that a lot of initial ecosystem was built here, and that ecosystem just continues to grow. And it's really cool to see.
Yeah, I honestly can't imagine doing anything else. Like once you've experienced this and you really understand how verifiable credentials could really, I think it's interesting because it's just, there's so many opportunities to use verifiable credentials to turn, I guess, paper-based processes into better processes, and also just digitized processes into digitally valuable processes as well. Like it's one thing to say I'm just digitizing a paper document, but being able to actually have verifiability and authenticity behind it, and actually being able to leverage this data further on in whatever customer journey or whatever you're trying to do is quite exciting. So yeah, honestly, I can't imagine doing anything else than this. And just to echo your comments earlier in the conversation, it's once you get lost in this stuff, it is true. In your day to day, you're just looking at stuff and you're like, oh my God, there's so many opportunities to use this stuff just to create a better world for ourselves.
Yeah, and I think you just spoke to a lot of business value that can be unlocked through decentralized identity. And I'm sure we'll get more into that because that's something that I've been basically obsessed with for the last 4 years. But while, before the topic, leaves, and just to add to your comment there, I think one of the main reasons that people stay in this space is not only for the big business opportunity, but it's also the fact that, I truly believe, and I believe most everyone else in this space truly believes that self-sovereign identity is going to create a better world for people, right? It's going to make basic services that people need, but they can't currently access, accessible. And it's gonna change the sort of power balance in the world to favor people more than it currently is. Like I can't see the future, but I do know that sort of giving individual people more privacy and more control and transparency into the way their data is used and managed, and all of the other sort of philosophical reasons that I think all the other philosophical conversations we could have about self-sovereign identity are a big part of why people stay in this space. I know for me, I would not be nearly as passionate about self-sovereign identity if it was just about automating business processes and making paper-based workflows more efficient. Although those are very good, that's where a lot of the money is to be made today. I think in the long run, what we're really trying to do is we're trying to create a digital economy that works for people, for the world. We're trying to create trust over the internet protocol, trust over IP. We're trying to create digital tools and digital ways for people to establish trust and get access to the things that they need and the things that they're entitled to. So I certainly wouldn't be nearly as passionate and work nearly as hard for this movement. And I don't think nearly as many people would stay in the space if it were only about the business value of what SSI can unlock.
Yeah, and I've gotten emails from you at like 6 a.m. Eastern time, and I know you're a couple hours or a few hours behind. So I definitely know that you're grinding away at this stuff because you truly believe in it, and it's a lot of the similar vision that just a lot of people generally in Web3 or just whatever decentralized technology have this vision for a digital economy with more balance, more transparency, more traceability, more value for people that are actually injecting value into the system. And just to close on the sovereign stuff, I think sovereign is amazing. Like I do spend a bit of time in the trust over IP, more particularly today in the utility foundry working group. And it's incredible just how much of kind of a step forward sovereign has made for everyone, because everyone trying to set up a public utility today is looking to sovereign as kind of a model. So it's sovereign's basically really shaping how the space is growing today. So when you left Sovereign to found a startup at the time called Street Cred. Do you mind talking through kind of the early days and the transition out of there? And am I assuming this was your first kind of startup?
Yeah, it was my first real startup. I mean, I've always been entrepreneurial from since I was a little kid. And I actually started a business when I was 14. Then I manufactured aftermarket freestyle razor scooter components, and I sold them to e-commerce stores and physical locations in the US and also in Australia, because that's a big sport down there. And so I did that throughout college or throughout high school, and that paid for college and stuff. So that was fun. But but this is my first tech startup, and I would say real startup in the sense that it's a startup that its goal is not to sustain my own kind of living, but it's a startup whose aim is to make a meaningful impact on the world and create an organization that is significant and enduring. But yeah, I'm happy to talk about the transition there. I mean, to me, Matthew, really, and this is going to sound dumb or cliche or whatever, but it really didn't feel like a transition. It felt like it just felt like I was doing the same thing, because while I was at Sovereign, I was just totally obsessed with the idea of getting adoption of self-sovereign identity, because I could see the future. Like I said, I was walking around and I would walk into a restaurant and I would walk into my university because I was a student at the time. And I would, everywhere I went, I saw what the world could be. And I just couldn't handle like living in this world where I knew it could be so much better and not doing anything about it. And so while I was at Sovereign, I was focused on, I was the staff lead over governance, for example. right? And so I was the staff person. I mean, Drummond Reed from Evernham deserves, so much credit for all of the work he's done on governance over the years, as well as at Sovereign. But he was an employee of Evernham, and so I was kind of the Sovereign employee that was working right alongside him and others on governance. And the whole point there was, how do we make SSI more adoptable? I did a lot of work on the Sovereign tokenomics. That was my other big project. Sovereign token was a big conversation at the time. And the tokenomics, I was sort of the lead of the tokenomics work at Sovereign, which was all about, how do we use potentially a cryptocurrency to facilitate, or a utility token to facilitate adoption of verifiable credentials and provide incentive mechanisms to drive that adoption. And then all the way to starting the SSI incubator, which was sort of an idea that I'd had from the beginning around, like, how do we help startups who are going to move fast and build use cases for different industries get funding and support that they needed to deploy this stuff. And so really everything I was doing at Sovereign was about trying to crack the code of adoption. Yeah, I guess the other piece is the business of SSI working group, which I started and led for some time. And some good work was done there as well. And so I guess all of my work at Sovereign was around getting adoption. And I guess the story of how Trinsic, or I guess at the time it was Street Cred, got started was that I was just it was just another continuation of what I was already doing. I was talking to people and I was saying, why aren't you going to production with your SSI solutions? What's holding you back? And what do we need to do to make it so that, nothing's holding you back? And over and over and over and over and over, I just heard that the tools were not there, that there were no products that could do what needed to be done. The technology wasn't mature enough. The technology wasn't quite there. The technology was too hard to use, hard to integrate into existing applications. And my answer, for a long time was, okay, well, the private sector or whatever, the marketplace will solve that problem. So that's not Sovereign's role. And that's true. And so I really eventually thought, okay, I've done all my stuff I need to do here at the Sovereign Foundation. And now I need to try to make it easy for people to, I need to work on this other piece, which is really productizing SSI in a way specifically that developers could easily integrate into their applications, whether they be existing applications that are serving existing markets or building new verticals and new use cases on top of self-sovereign identity for whatever business problem that they're solving. And so I got together with Tomislav Markovsky, and who wrote the first Aries framework for mobile. And then also Michael Boyd, who wrote the first indie agent in Python, along with the rest of the kind of working group at the time. And so two of the really kind of founding engineers or really code producers in the Hyperledger Aries project, and said, guys, let's get together and let's make something that makes it really easy for developers to integrate SSI into any application, right? Let's try to make it as simple as Stripe made payments, or as simple as Twilio made communications, or as simple as, name your API-based developer-focused company made whatever thing easier, right? And so that's what we did. And so when I transitioned into doing Street Cred, it really just felt more like, it was my next step in making SSI easier to adopt. And quite frankly, that was last Monday. We announced Trinsic Ecosystems, which is our new product and our new focus. I wouldn't say new focus, but it's a productized kind of way to build trust ecosystems. And that is, again, the same kind of next step in that same journey to make SSI adoptable and easy to use, and really get digital wallets in the hands of people that have credentials that are using them for useful purposes, So anyway, that's kind of the summary.
Yeah, and I was going to hop forward because in the meantime, you guys have been kind of the go-to for developer tools. Like that's how we kind of met each other, or we had developers looking at the stuff, and the the best repos or the best contributions were coming from your team. So you kind of really pushed the bar forward there and made it easy for a lot of people to start implementing self-sovereign identity. Now, as you're looking, I guess, like you said, it's not like you weren't looking at ecosystems. It's kind of like, okay, now that we've developed these tools for developers to do basic functions, like make connections and exchange credentials and do verifications and so forth. That's kind of the space that us as a company as well, like we were kind of looking at this and saying, you know what, like a lot, there needs to be a provider. There needs to be someone that's going to create an ecosystem, create the rules, create the governance. Because we could talk about kind of community-driven things, which when you mentioned tokenomics before, there's a discussion there to be had. But if we just take a step back and we look at how do you enable organizations or companies to really offer the benefits of self-sovereign identity to their customers, to their employees, and how do you reap the benefits from less friction, more privacy, and the list goes on and on. You need to have someone kind of kickstarting the ecosystem. So was that kind of the same realization there for you guys? And then what did you feel was necessary to make this easy for an ecosystem provider to really get going?
Yeah, I think for us, it was more, I mean, yes, we had that same journey as well, but I think for us, it was more around, we had this, we still have, right? We have this, developer platform. We have this API product that's being used by hundreds of organizations. And it was really an exercise of looking at the current state of our product and its growth and its, the different sort of segments. Some people are using verifiable credentials for authentication. Others are using it for, sharing, building these ecosystems. Others are using credentials in a contained kind of closed ecosystem, and others are an open ecosystem, and others, there's various different use cases for credentials, of course, and kind of looking at our own data that we'd collected and kind of thinking, where are credentials getting adoption, really, right? Because that's really our, like I said, that's been the number one thing since day one. It still is. It's going to be the main priority all the way until we've got a network effect established for verifiable credentials so strong that nothing's ever going to topple it. And so that's going to be the thing that we're constantly thinking about is adoption. And so looking at the data that we had, it was like, credentials are getting adoption. The best use case today and the best way to get credentials into the world with real adoption has been in these ecosystems. It's when people come to our platform, pick up the product and use it to build an ecosystem. That's where the best adoption has been. And so I would say that the Trinsic ecosystems product was really about talking to our customers who'd already created ecosystems, building things for them that helped solve their problems and helped make it easier for them to build ecosystems, and then trying to generalize that and saying, okay, if these 5 companies need a trust registry, for example, which we can talk about high level, it's a list of issuers that are authorized to issue certain types of credentials. And so if these 5 customers need this, is this something that can be generalized to more use cases and, going out and talking with other people? And that's something I think we've been really intentional about at Trinsic is talking to the people who are actually implementing and deploying this stuff in production. And, basically Trinsic ecosystems is our way of productizing all of those things that everybody needs if they want to deploy a credential ecosystem, all of at least the general pieces that people need, so that they can configure an ecosystem and then kind of deploy it out to their little the network that they're trying to affect.
I think I love the vision, and there's a lot of similarities for me, again, coming from like crypto blockchain space where people were trying to trying to reinvent the world in so many different ways. And again, that's a separate conversation, but ecosystems exist today all over the place, right? And so I think a lot of people, when they approach something new with a new technology, they're trying to create this new way of doing something when things necessarily aren't done that way, and it's not necessarily the easiest way to get people bought into doing something new. So it's kind of like, if I have a business case for credentials, which there's 100 of them, and it could be just to reduce costs or reduce fraud or lower my compliance costs or lower friction, whatever it is. You need an easy way for an organization or whoever is already participating in an ecosystem, but that is just trying to make it a credential ecosystem, to really get it going and get its existing kind of governance rule sets and relationships kind of into this new model. And so I think what you guys are doing there is good, and it makes it a lot easier for people to start using this stuff without just throwing out what they've already done. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that the point is, like you said, there's already ecosystems out there. And the other thing to keep in mind is, taking a step back again to the meta topic of adoption. I've never talked to anybody in my life who has questioned the value of SSI if we assume that there is widespread adoption already, right? But the question is always, how do you get to that point? How do you bootstrap the network effect? And how do you, it's not always a great user experience to ask your customer to download a wallet, right? But if they already have a wallet and they already have credentials in it, then it's an awesome user experience for them to just sort of streamline the access process through SSI as one example of many that I could give, right? But and I think that the ecosystem approach is a very sort of pragmatic way for organizations to do something using verifiable credentials that is uniquely valuable today. It's something that they can do today that'll add value in a way that nothing else on planet Earth really can. Of course, depending on, there's some caveats there maybe, but if you want to argue it, but I think fundamentally verifiable credentials, what they're good at is portable data and verifiable data. And when you have an ecosystem, you've either got the alternatives to verifiable credentials are very costly and cumbersome and not scalable when it comes to the sharing data in these ecosystems. And so I think it's a really good way to give organizations something that they can do today that will add value and reduce costs and increase revenues and whatever else they want to accomplish, while also keeping the door open for that eventual future where verifiable credentials will be ubiquitous and where we will get to the more kind of decentralized interactions that we all hope to see in the future.
Do you have concerns with the term self-sovereign identity when talking to a prospect, when people are so used to doing something today, maybe self-sovereign sounds kind of too out there, or people may have mixed feelings about it too. And then the term self-sovereign identity, you have the self-sovereign aspect, but the identity aspect is maybe not necessarily everything that it encompasses as well. And I know you have written a blog post, which is very good. It's called SSI Has an Identity Problem.
Yeah.
Did you front load self-sovereign or self-sovereign identity in conversations? How do you look at that?
No, I do not front load it. It depends on who I'm talking to, right? You always want to gauge your audience. So I guess when I'm talking to you, Matthew, I use the term self-sovereign identity or SSI. I'm assuming many of the listeners here are familiar with the concept, right? And because of your other podcasts and things like that. But you've got to gauge your audience. One of the things that I talked about, I don't remember if it's in that blog post or another one. I did another blog post about SSI adoption and the current state of adoption. And one of the things I talk about is to, don't talk past your prospect or your buyer or your, whatever, right? So make sure you're using language that's shared. And one of the challenges with any new technology is there's no shared vocabulary. And that's the easiest way to communicate something. Since we both know what a newspaper is, I can just say the word newspaper, and there's a whole bunch of context that we both have of shared knowledge that, we can just use that one word instead of describing what that is in a bunch of words and sentences, which, I can try to do here, but I'm not gonna take the time to do that. But I think you can see the point with SSI, right? When you already have all the context, I can just say that acronym and you get a bunch of knowledge. Whereas if you don't already have that context, you've got to use a bunch of words to try to fill in that context. It's one thing that Timothy Ruff and I have talked about for years is, we've been looking for a way to convey all of that context in as simple a way as possible. And, if possible, just a few words or one sentence. And I think we've gotten close in various ways, but we haven't gotten all the way there. So generally speaking, when talking to a prospect, it is all about the use case and the business value. And it is not at all about the way to get there or the implementation path, right? So it's almost like, if somebody wants to do COVID test results, and all they want is the ability to know that the COVID test was actually done by a legitimate lab. They don't care how necessarily. They just want to know that's their business problem, right? So just talking about it in terms of the business problem and in terms of, their context and words that they're familiar with is, I think, the way to do that successfully. But yeah, like I said, I wrote like you said, I wrote a blog about all of the different names that people have tried to use for SSI over the years. There's a new proposal that's not in that blog post. Maybe I'll make an edit to that blog post about the term authentic data, which I like. But again, every name has its own trade-offs. So I would say generally, do I have problems with the term SSI? Yes. Do I think SSI is the most widely used and is the best term still to convey all of that context? Yes. But do I use it frequently with people who are unfamiliar or potential prospects? No.
Yeah, it's all about solving a business problem today, right? For organizations, and like KYC is a good example. For regulatory reasons, you need to collect and verify certain information about a prospective customer before offering them financial services or offering them whatever. And the world of technology solution providers that are selling into these companies today, I feel like it's very like one transactional. Of course, you have in the financial world, there's every time you're doing a payment or conducting a transaction, there's monitoring, there's stuff that goes on for various policies such as anti-money laundering, but a lot of the business value that people seem to be looking to get out of credentials is just that verifiability. So what we're seeing, and I'm curious kind of how you look at this too, is that talking about user centricity and consent driven decisions and privacy and better security is more interesting. And again, it depends who you're talking to. If you're talking to someone that understands self-sovereign identity, then you could talk broader than that. But just talking about these core values or aspects of self-sovereign identity is maybe easier to get in the door, get credentials used within their respective ecosystem, and then slowly start talking about, okay, now let's explore, now that we've done this thing, now, by the way, there's a lot more upside that you could get through the reusability and portability of these things. Is my thought process similar to how you engage with prospects?
Yes. I guess the other thing that I'll say is I think it's like what you and I, Matthew, are selling, for lack of a better term, is SSI, right? We're selling decentralized identity. We're selling the ability for companies to implement this stuff, right? But what all of our customers are selling is some specific use case or business problem. So I think for the things that I say in a conversation with a prospect will be different than the things I think our customer will say. So take Farmer Connect, for example. Farmer Connect has built a very awesome sort of traceability solution where you can scan a QR code on your coffee beans, it resolves all the way back through the supply chain to an individual farmer who has a self-sovereign identity. And that farmer can choose what data they want to share, what information they want to share from all their verifiable credentials with the end consumer of the coffee beans that they grew. And then the consumer can sort of tip the farmer that grew the coffee beans. And it's a very cool kind of use case that implements SSI. Farmer Connect is not selling SSI to their ecosystem, right? They're selling transparency, and they're selling sustainability, and they're selling a specific thing. Whereas somebody like Trinsic, right, we don't build specific products. We work with companies who are building specific vertically focused products, but we don't do that. We try to be the best in the world at building those tools and the low level stuff. And so the conversation that I have maybe with a prospect would be different than what I would advise a customer of ours or an implementer of SSI solutions directly. Like I would think Farmer Connect, is going to talk about farmers sharing their data in a way that's privacy respecting, and that those farmers can use to get access to credit and other things, right? That's what they're going to talk about the farmers. They're not going to talk about self-sovereign identity necessarily, or at least I wouldn't necessarily advise them to. Whereas when I have a conversation with someone, it is going to be about, the tools and the technology and the approach, because, it's almost like Amazon, AWS is going to be talking about, the cloud and the benefits of moving to the cloud. And, Pinterest is going to be talking about, pictures, and Uber is going to be talking about rides, but, they're both built on AWS. But to the end consumer and for the sake of the use case, I don't think you need to talk about the technology that's powering it. Really, it just totally depends on what you're using the technology for and talking about the business problem. So,
yeah, fair enough. And one of the, I guess, the four findings that you did write another great piece, 4 keys for SSI adoption. One of the findings was just don't sell the tech. And so I think you just alluded to that again here, in selling the value of SSI instead. One of your other, I think it was your 4th key for SSI adoption was kind of that chicken and egg problem. Has your thinking advanced since you've written this? And maybe can you just talk about the kind of the survey you did and how you approached this thing? I think it's pretty cool that you kind of went out there and came up with these findings.
Yeah, so the survey that I did, I was kind of thinking, like, there's so many companies out there who are deploying SSI based solutions. And so the survey I did, and almost all of them are using some vendor to help them, right? And so the survey was really like reaching out to other vendors like us and asking whether those vendors have any insight on their customers and their customers' adoption. And they, turns out they do. And so it was more about like collaborating with other vendors, and never got to there's still kind of conversations around confidentiality or whatever there. And so that's why it's not all the data, raw data is not shared, but high level I did share what I felt like I could. And so really I talked to all the SSI vendors that you probably have heard of, and got every one of them except with maybe an exception or two, depending on who you want to count in that arena as a vendor, of people doing some of the like low level kind of work on SSI, and just talking to them about their customers. And I would say it's not maybe exhaustive, but it was a lot of the more kind of prominent players, I guess, and just talking with them, where are your customers at? Have they gone to production? How, what's the size? What's essentially the scale of that deployment? And how, what's the approach and things like that? And ultimately, on that last piece that you're talking about around the chicken and egg problem, of course, if a bank is willing to accept a driver's license and you already have a digital driver's license on your device, and you can simply, tap a NFC reader as you walk into the bank and whatever. I mean, you can imagine really great user experiences once this stuff is widespread, but until that point, there's a there's a challenge with sort of where is the specific value that verifiable credentials can add. And kind of my answer there was there's really two ways to get around that. One is to take an ecosystem type approach, which I think we've seen some successes in doing. And the other is to take a single-sided approach, which refers to like the 2 or 3-sided marketplace that is SSI at scale. Take one side of that, which is like work with just the issuer and try to solve a problem for just the issuer, or work with just the verifier and try to solve a problem with just the verifier. And, starting with only one side of that. And when I asked, I think it was 30 some people in this survey I did, and this wasn't just a survey, it was an hour-long kind of interview with each of these people, where I kind of dug deeper into the kind of background behind the answers. And 50% of them, said that an ecosystem type approach was the right way to go, and 50% said a single-sided approach was the right way to go. So really, the answer is nobody knows what the right way is, and maybe the answer is that there is no right way. It's just what works for a given use case. But somehow, in order to kind of reach the value that we all see in SSI, we've got to get some kind of network of verifiable credential issuers, verifiers, and holders to exist. And once those networks can sort of cross-pollinate, and you can get a network of networks, right, or a network of ecosystems, maybe is the other way to think about it. That's when the value is really tremendous, and that's when the kind of promises that we all want to see happen will be unlocked. And in order to get there, you've got to start somewhere, right? You've got to start with some immediate use case that can add value. The fax machine took 100 years almost to get, a widespread network effect. And the fax machine, it started out like its first initial use cases were point-to-point selling within the U.S. military applications, right? Because it's very secure. And so sending, confidential documentation from point to point within the military, that was, first use case for the fax machine. That's a single-sided use case. It's selling a new technology to one party and having them implement it internally or for their own processes. Beyond that, it eventually became a way for other companies to get data from the US military, right? And from the US Postal Service. And so then it became kind of that's where the network effect was built from. It started on a single-sided thing just with one party, and then other people started building on top of that network or that initial node and building other kind of nodes relative to the first one to create a network effect. The question I ask in that blog is like, what's the best way to make that happen within SSI? Is it to go after a single party, like just the issuer or verifier, or to kind of try to tackle a whole ecosystem and get both sides of the market there from the start? Which an example of that would be something like, COVID credentials, where, the lab issues the credential and some employer or airline or venue or something verifies the credential. And there's sort of two sides, two separate parties that are interacting. And, I can't speak to what's best. What I can say is that we've seen ecosystems. I already spoke to the fact that, ecosystems, at least in our worldview or in our with the people that we work with, the ecosystems have been the ones that have seen strong initial adoption. That doesn't mean that, the other approach won't also. I think these things are not mutually exclusive, but that's why we created the Trinsic ecosystems product, was really to lean into that insight that we had on ecosystems and make it easier for people to bring in issuers and verifiers and holders into a single trust ecosystem without a lot of kind of custom development work and implementation. So.
Yeah, and the fax is unfortunately still used today for stuff. Every time I see that, I just can't get over it. But
well, it goes to show how powerful a network effect can be, because you think about the fact that fax is still so prominent. Like we may not use it in our everyday life quite as much, but it's still really, when you look at volumes, it's still a very prominent communication vehicle, around the world for secure document sharing, right? And the fact that that is true is a testament to how powerful a network effect can be. And if we can create a network effect with something that empowers individuals and gives them more privacy and and autonomy and things like that. I mean, that's something I want to be a part of.
Thank you for listening. Hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. To stay up to speed with future episode releases, please subscribe to the podcast on whatever channel you're listening to it right now. If you have any questions or comments, please reach out to me directly. You can find me online. I'm quite active on LinkedIn and Twitter, so I look forward to hearing from you. See you all next time.